Well, I'm going to get us kicked off here. I am super thrilled that you are here to join us today for what is going to be a completely unscripted webinar on what systems and AI actually enable powerful learning and learning design in K-12 education. We have three incredible panelists, and we have some questions to guide this conversation, but the level of expertise and knowledge and just the eloquentness of our three panelists is going to allow us to not to stick strictly to a formal script and to hear really what they're thinking on these deeper dive questions around systems and AI. So I'm going to just briefly introduce each of our panelists, let them talk about themselves for 90 seconds or so. That's a hint, guys, don't keep talking too long. And then we'll just launch into a couple of questions, but please consider this a safe space for everyone. So if you have questions you want to hear from these three men, type them in the chat. You have full access to use the chat function. We're looking forward to this being interactive. I will be watching that chat for you as well. So let's go ahead and start with Dr. Richard Charles. He's the Chief Information Officer for Denver Public Schools. Dr. Charles, you want to say a few words about yourself, your role, your philosophy?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Charles. I am the Chief Information Officer for Denver Public Schools. Prior to joining the field of education for the past 20 some odd years, I was in private industry as a researcher and software developer. And there's a lot of exciting work happening around artificial intelligence and would love to share some of the details around that. My philosophy with all of this work ultimately is anchored in student engagement and making sure that the guardrails are in place.
Awesome. Thank you. And just to prove that this is we're unscripted here a little bit, I'm going to introduce Glenn Fajardo. And had I been scripted, I would have checked to make sure that I pronounced your name right first. So did I get close?
You did.
All right. Well, Glenn is the Chief Learning Officer at Digital Media Academy, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. I just needed to know if I needed to apologize first. So
No worries. And just as a clarification, I'm the former Chief Learning Officer of Digital Media Academy. I transitioned out of that role at the end of 2025. I'm also a member of the teaching community at the Stanford D School. Been active for about 12 years there, working with John and others. I'm kind of focused on how to help people be more curious and experimental with new technologies that emerge over their lifetimes.
that is amazing. I definitely want to hear more about that on the webinar because I think curiosity will help a lot with some of the change management issues that systems and schools face when they introduce new technologies too. So, and lastly, but definitely not least, Dr. John Mitchell. He's a professor of computer science at Stanford and also part of the D School. So, John, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I've taught at computer science at Stanford here for a few decades. And I got off into education by accident by building a platform that led to a bunch of MOOC stuff around 2011, 2012, and then became Stanford Vice Provost for Online Learning and Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning when we thought, some people thought anyway, that video would somehow disrupt higher education. I learned a lot during that time. And one of the things I learned is like video doesn't really do it because it doesn't engage people back and forth. But I've always been interested in technology and how it can help with learning. And what I see in AI is it's a back and forth kind of medium. People can ask and discuss or debate. And so it does kind of bring a solution to the limitation that we saw in a 10-year ago kind of effort to invigorate learning in some ways. And so I'm really excited to see where AI is going and how it can help students and teachers and everyone learn more effectively.
And that is a long time to be teaching computer science. So much has changed right in front of your eyes. I mean, this is definitely different than what you started with, right?
Yeah, I've been a great field. I started out programming as a student, punching stuff onto like these cards that I think most people have never seen in their lives, but I carried boxes and boxes of them around for a few years and a few jobs I had. So yes, it's a new world every 3.5 years.
Well, my undergraduate is from the University of Georgia, and when I did my course registration, Georgia was my undergraduate was actually in business, and they were very computer forward and trying to be innovative. And I registered on those punch cards. So I had to punch my card, put it
Yeah,
in the
right.
machine, wait for the report, the return to come back to let me know I had my classes. So I know
Yeah, I don't
exactly
know.
what you're
I don't know
talking
where you
about.
can buy one now. They're probably high-priced antique items, one of those things that were
Yeah.
toys. Yeah.
I also paid $515 a quarter for tuition. So things have changed a lot over the years. So, but
It was
anyway,
it
ladies
was
and gentlemen,
also the time, Stacy, of 300 baud modems, if you can
there
recall.
you go.
Yeah, right.
I
Uh-huh.
can. Well, welcome everyone to today's conversation. It's going to be grounded in simple and important idea that AI itself doesn't determine the quality of learning. Our systems do. I am Dr. Stacey Hawthorne. I'm the board chair for CoSN. I'm also the executive director of the EdTech Leaders Alliance and chief academic officer at Learn 21. And the EdTech Leaders Alliance serves as the home for the Ohio CoSN chapter. So I'm thrilled to be a moderator, not a panelist. I don't get to answer the questions, I get to ask them. But just so honored to be in the presence of three giants in this field and who can help expand our thinking in a variety of different ways. The way we design interfaces, workflows, guardrails, and expectations is either going to raise the bar for deep thinking and collaboration, or we're going to quietly lower it. And this conversation, I'm going to be asking questions to allow our panelists to share what they see from their very different vantage points. So we've already done some quick introductions. I'm going to throw this out here. I'm not going to call on anybody. And I know from our pre-conversation that each of you are in different areas in education and the systems look different for each of you. But in one sentence, what is one system decision you've seen that clearly raised expectations for learning with AI? And you may need to define what system means for you in this. So in one sentence, what's one system decision you've seen that raised expectations for learning with AI?
I can take a stab at that. So clearly our students today, our kindergartners are going to be immersed in a world of artificial intelligence in the late 2030s. Um, and one of the things that our Board of Education did was they took a stand to make sure that in our ends policy, we are a policy governance organization, that there is an expectation that artificial intelligence and its tools are utilized by all students in our system. And so that was a big decision that the board made to just put a stake in the sand to make a commitment for AI use and that we're not running away from it.
One of the things that I've seen is an effort here on the technology side to provide access to accounts on AI platforms and models that are respectful of our data policies and student privacy. So I think that kind of opens up for people a way to experiment, because I think there's legitimately a lot of concern about ethics, about privacy, when you have students typing in stuff in to model, where is that data going? And so I think the institutional effort to address that directly and give people some clarity on it has been very helpful, just in terms of peace of mind and getting people going.
I think one thing that I think we're still in very early days on this, but I think one thing that I've seen is a shift from looking more exclusively at like what students produce as kind of outputs or outcomes, and looking more deeply at the process of how they're thinking and how they're working through problems. If they're looking through multiple possibilities, how they're kind of iterating through things, but like looking at education from a kind of a process point of view more deeply, and not being so singularly focused on outputs as a measure of learning.
And I think that gets to a really important point, because if we're looking at that process and the growth in the process, then we start to eliminate some of the worry about cheating and plagiarism when we're talking about AI. And I just had this conversation with some folks at the AASA conference in Nashville about 2 weeks ago, and I was in a breakout session, and they had a scenario where they were having participants think, pair, share. And the question was, how is a building system leader do you support English teachers who are particularly afraid of students plagiarizing, but you want to encourage the use of AI? And so they're like, if you are a teacher and you have 3 periods and you have 30 students per period and they're turning in a paper of 1,000 words, 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 1,0 a certain number of pages. I'm just going to say 5-page paper, whatever that is at the high school level. And now you have 90 of these papers to grade. How do you use AI to help lighten your workload without losing the relationship and the trust with the teacher or with the student? And so there was a lot of debate about, well, the teacher could, tell it to give feedback and do different things. And my comment at that time was, what if the student turns in the paper to the student? The student turns in the paper to the teacher. The teacher doesn't actually grade it, but instead the teacher responds with, here's a pre-written prompt that I want you to take your paper and feed into whatever AI we're using. I'll just say ChatGPT for the sake of this one. And it's asking the AI to look for feedback on 5, 8, 10, 12, whatever those basic metrics are. And they're getting the feedback directly from the AI. And then they know that that's AI generated feedback. They don't think that they're giving something to a teacher and the teacher's giving them feedback. Then the student is required to make those edits and then create their own prompt because they've had some scaffolding about other places where they want their paper to improve to get that level of feedback. And then they turn in the final product, but the product is that process from the beginning to the edits to the second round of the edits to the final thing. And then we're talking about looking at that process. I personally don't feel like I became a good or competent writer until grad school. And it's not because I suddenly learned to write, it's because my graduate professor said, this isn't your best work. You get to do it over again. And I didn't realize what a pass I was getting in high school if I got a B on a paper and I was done with it because I didn't get that pass in grad school. I had to keep doing it. And so you're learning that process. And so I think, that's a way that we can help people see AI as a piece of that collaboration and enhancing learning. And again, I said this was unscripted because this is not anywhere in the notes. So, what are the three of you see ways for AI to be a part of that learning acceleration process and the personalization process, but without worrying about that fear of, is this cheating? What do you think?
So I think English is a very interesting topic area, and one of the things that's as a side, what we think of in at least in the university setting is the tech people, the scientists will be the early adopters with new technology, but I don't think that's really the case here. That this is most easily used for writing and text oriented things. One thing to keep in mind, I think, is that students are very creative. In the project we have with a local high school, what I found is that the high school students are way ahead of the teachers in their use of AI. They have a process that they all use and talk to each other, and they're ahead. So one useful thing I think is for teachers to kind of open up this dialogue with their students and ask, how would you approach this now, and how can we restructure this assignment, so that it's helpful for you. The students are in this place of kind of cognitive dissonance around AI, thinking it's cheating, but not feeling guilty enough to not do it because they get a grade. And I think, as you pointed out, there are many, many ways you could try to bring AI into this. Ask as an assignment, ask everyone to generate 2 bad essays using AI and then critique them and then write their own and explain why their thing is better. There's 100 ways to go with this. But I think opening up the dialogue between the students and the teachers would be, and then make sure tech support is behind wherever the process is going. That seems like a promising direction to me.
Yeah, to expand on what John said, like it's kind of taking AI from under the table and putting it kind of over the table and make it a shared experience where we're like going through like what it's like to use AI in different applications, like in a class. One class that I co-teach is on negotiation by design, and we've been talking about going heavy on the AI experimentation and kind of demonstrating like here's kind of a not so great use of AI, but let's see what it looks like. And then here's where you can kind of do better with more in-depth approaches. But I think modeling and kind of taking it from under the table and uh, taking away the sense that it's something that students need to hide, I think can be a step in the right direction.
There was a
Charles, you want to add or?
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Those are all great points. I think the plagiarism discussion has continued to be a point of contention with teachers, right? They believe that they can use plagiarism detectors, and I think some of the latest research indicated that they're not terribly reliable and you can get around them pretty easily, right? So, um, I used to give an example of blurring that line with plagiarism where I upload all of my writings. And if I have an assignment as a student, I would then say, okay, in my own voice, give me a first draft of, the Civil War from the Northern perspective or something to that effect, right? And then as a first draft, going through similar to what John and Glenn said, you just continue to revise and critique. It's like having additional people in your course. And so as much as we can get students to be able to interact in a healthy manner, right? With an unbiased kind of tool like AI, depending on which tool you use, you might be able to get some really rich transformational types of experiences. One of the areas that we are proponents of in DPS is project-based learning and making it very, very real for students, right? So you can set up an entire company in AI world and have some real exciting problems that students can work on. And then their work is looking quite different, right? Because you're now raising the bar of what assessment looks like, and you can iterate and you can do some exciting things as you continue to dive deeper into any particular subject.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Maybe
Back in the day, I used to teach math. And when my daughters, who were in an accelerated math program in middle school and high school, with their friends, when they had a test, they would all come do their study night, the study group before the test at our house. And I didn't lead the study group. And they did all of the math themselves and they were doing the practice problems. But they knew if they got stuck or they needed an explanation, I was available to them. And so,
Sure.
while I didn't facilitate it, I was a resource in the room. And so when people talk about, AI is cheating, was that cheating? Like there are other kids in their class didn't have a math teacher living in their house. And so were they cheating or were they using their resources wisely? So I think we really have to kind of consider where is it cheating and where is it, and I'm using cheating loosely, but where is it, leveling the playing field for people that don't have a math teacher for yeah, a parent type situation. John, I think you wanted to say something. I'm
You have
sorry if
one
I cut
other
you off.
perspective on it that just might be helpful for some. I mean, it has to do with the web. I remember when the web was a new thing, and that might date me in a way, but there were my kids were in elementary school at the time, and there were all these prohibitions. You can't possibly look this up on the web. That would be cheating. Let's prohibit use of the web for all the school assignments. You have to go to the library and learn to find a book. That's going to skill that you're going to need for the rest of your life. And that has all gone by the wayside. So if you kind of replace AI by, web search, Google it, you can see how some of these ideas that people have put forward just aren't going to last. It's not going to be possible in 3 years, 5 years to say, don't use AI, for your homework. That's just is it can be a helpful short-term process, but it's not going to be any more workable long-term than don't use web search to research your topic.
So, John, was your first browser Mosaic or Netscape or another one?
Somewhere in there, probably. I don't, probably whatever came first. I think Mosaic came before
I think it was
Netscape.
Mosaic
Yeah,
first, yeah.
it's a real
Well, I
eye
will tell you to this day, I still like WordPerfect better than Microsoft Word. So
opener.
all right. So we talked just briefly about things that have raised the expectations for learning with AI. But thinking back early on, AI came out. I'm just going to pick on New York City public schools because none of you are there. But they flat out came out and said, we're going to ban this. We're not going to use it. And turns out that wasn't where they ended up going. So that to me is an example of a system decision that looked helpful, but actually was blocking deeper learning. Can you think of other examples in your experience of system decisions that looked helpful, but are actually blocking deeper learning?
I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that it's easy to make a short term. I mean, we all had to make policy decisions when ChatGPT came out. And the easy thing to do was sort of consider it cheating or make it like a different source. You have to, a policy for students for the first year and then think longer term, we'll have to do something different. One mistake people make, I think, is not going back and revisiting their policy decisions as things evolve. That's an easy kind of oversight. And one thing I just would encourage everyone to, revisit once a year whether the policies you had for last year are still kind of meaningful for the coming year.
I'll hop in here. So, from my seat as Chief Information Officer for DPS, pilots of software from vendors seem to be a good idea initially. We would have teachers come back from the latest conference and they'll say, "Look, I just got a great pilot that we can just load on our systems and we'll be just fine." And we ended up having to really tighten that down because, as you know, there are all sorts of data privacy issues with many of these tools. And so we wanted to make sure we stayed ahead of it. We revamped the entire procurement process for software. We went from over 1,000 software applications running on our system to about 300, and now we're back up to about 400. But for the most part, we were able to get rid of a lot of software that's in violation of state and federal laws, and student privacy and things of that nature. So initially, pilots seemed like a great idea to do many of these things. In some control situations, maybe it makes sense, but for the most part, it really needs to be the other way around. We need to be very strict with what data people get access to.
I think one thing I've noticed is AI has been heavily framed as an efficiency tool. Not only, do students look at it that way, but also some teachers can at sometimes. And I think of this announcement that John forwarded to me from a student group where people were having a meeting about like, are you mad about your teachers using AI to like create quizzes, kind of get mad about that. And but I totally understand it where I think we're underestimating how certain ways in which you use AI can kind of communicate the signal of, I didn't put much effort into this, or like I didn't kind of give it much thought, or kind of if it screams, I used AI as a shortcut, that often sends a negative social signal. So if we think just in terms of efficiency and we don't think about the social dynamics of what's communicated by how we use technology tools, I think it's something that we're going to have to learn a lot more about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So Dr. Charles, one of the things I always tell people, because they're always, oh, I got this app for free. So two of my isms are one of your worst case scenarios for data privacy is great teachers making bad decisions for the right reasons. Because I went to a vendor hall, I got a water bottle, it's free. I'll just upload 150 kids' email addresses and not check it out with anybody. And the other thing I always try to remind teachers is if you're not paying for it with cash or POs or those types of things, you're paying for it with data. So we're always paying for it somehow. There is no free like it's free like a puppy, not free like a beer. When we're talking about educational technology and students' data. And so I really appreciate the Denver Public Schools commitment to protecting student data and to making solid decisions on behalf of the students. I'm going to toss you a question here. From your district system perspective, what's an invisible decision that leaders rarely talk about, but has a big impact on whether or not AI is supporting deeper learning or just accelerating task completion?
An invisible decision. I think we do have a challenge of monitoring what applications are being used in our system right now. Many of these AI tools don't give us the visibility into the large language exchange, the chats that are occurring, right? And so, from our perspective, we are a Google organization, and so we have the entire Google suite. And yet, when we pull up the most used large language model, it's often not Google, it's actually ChatGPT and some of the other tools, right? Even Grok is now gaining momentum. And so we established a governance committee to try and assist with making some of those decisions. Most notably, we recently blocked ChatGPT for the collaborative chat and the adult content um, because of some of the guardrails that are just not robust at this stage. And so, in making that decision, we're also engaging the community as a part of that work. But truly, there is the unspoken reality that they're getting around all of our expectations. So, as a school district, a large urban school district, we are now trying to create a an approved list of applications that can be used on our system, rather than saying don't use this and don't use this, so that people understand that they have um, the same capabilities with other applications that are on our approved list and provide safety, security, and unbiased approach to AI.
I'm going to put you on the spot just a teeny bit because pre-webinar we were talking and you really talked a little bit about guardrails and how essential those are for keeping students safe. You want to expound on that just a little bit?
Sure. One of the things, one of the reasons I'll speak specifically about ChatGPT and more broadly. Um, One of the features that they mentioned the other day is age detection as an algorithm. You can go to the OpenAI website right now and download the paper or position paper that they have on how that works. It requires users to upload a lot of information about themselves, or the company is gathering all of that information in order to make that determination, which is in direct violation of our data privacy laws. And so it makes it challenging for us. Now, in addition to that, I've said this on several panels over the past 4 or 5 years now. You can just Google ways to get around the latest and greatest, and our teenagers are wonderful. We were having that chat beforehand. They're excellent in being able to bypass any of the guardrails that are there, and so it's wide open. So if you think that you are solving for something that's going to protect your system, it's like playing whack-a-mole. So it's important that you are very controlled in your approach.
Fabulous. And Glenn, did you want to add on? It looked like you wanted to say add on a little bit there.
Not from me,
Okay,
thanks.
perfect. Well, the good news is I'm going to give you the next question. Dr. Charles talked from a district systems perspective, and from a learning design standpoint, what's a system or interface choice that most strongly influences whether a student engages in independent thinking versus just defaulting to the AI for answers?
Yeah, I think about this point that James Donovan, who's the cognitive outcomes research lead at OpenAI, made on panel that John moderated at Stanford a few weeks ago. And he said that ChatGPT is a productivity tool, it's designed with the aim to get you to an answer quickly. Like that's literally what it's designed to do. And so it's I think it's important to think about, like, as we talk about using tools, like what is the tool designed for? Like what is the default behavior of it? In some ways, like complaining that ChatGPT gives people answers too quickly, it's kind of like complaining that a microwave oven heats food too quickly. Kind of like that's what it does. That's what it's designed to do. And so I think one thing that's kind of interesting as an opportunity is to engage students in thinking about tools more kind of more deeply and kind of critically about, like, what is this tool kind of guiding me towards? What is it designed to do? And then what am I trying to do? And is there like a match between those two things? I think there is a level of responsibility from leadership and from administration to kind of provide some guardrails. But I think it's really important to engage students in kind of noticing those things for themselves so that they have um, some sense of sort of agency and motivation. Also, again, to bring it above the table, that it's becoming an open conversation of what is it that we're trying to do. I think it's also kind of a little bit strange to to tell students not to use AI as the easy button when that's what a lot of adults are also doing. Like that's kind of the so I think there's an opportunity for all of us to think about like what are the habits around how we use AI? Like what do we want to use it for? Like how do we want to engage our brains in that? And not so much separate students from things like students that as people that need to be controlled or guided, but kind of involve them in constructing like what is good use of AI? Like how do you want to develop your mind and your abilities in the way that you want to?
I could give a research example that supports this and is related. We run as a group in our department a free online computer science course every spring for 10,000 students from all over the world. And it's become an excellent experimental platform for trying different things to see how they work for students. That student group is totally open to experiments as it's a free course. One of my graduate students in the last couple runs of the course was experimenting with how to provide access to an AI model in the course. And we tried 6 or 7 different ways of introducing that into the course platform. And then we measured what happened when students responded to this. And the simplest takeaway is we experimented with placing the access to the AI model in the interface that students use to do their programming homework. And we introduced it separately into the place where students listen to videos and read new material to learn new concepts. And so someone in the class would be in one experimental group or the other. They would have it in one place or the other. And what we found, which is not at all surprising in retrospect, is that the questions that students asked, the things they were focused on, the way they used the responses differed completely between those two things. If you put it in the expository interface, they ask high-level questions. Why is this important? Tell me more about it. Help me learn. And if you put it in the homework interface, they ask, how do I solve my problem? How do I get the homework right? And so it makes total sense if you think about it. We always do that as people. If I said, here's my friend Glenn, he plays the electric bass, you're going to have one conversation with him. And if I say, here's my friend Glenn, he teaches a course on negotiation, your first question to him is going to be something different and you'll go a different direction. So I think how we introduce the technology, where we place it, even, what color is the button, these kind of things, have a surprising influence on where people go in their use.
That's a really excellent point. I'm going to toss my next question to you too, John. So, from a technical and systems architecture lens, what's the earliest design decision where you can tell that an AI system is going to raise learning expectations?
How do you tell if it's raising learning expectations? That's a boy, that's a long, complex question. I think a starting point is basically to follow up on my last thought. If you present this as here's a tool that will help you do more, that's very different from here's a tool that will help you do the old thing, less, more efficiently. So I think that this is a important theme is if we have some tool that helps us do things more quickly, that should raise the bar rather than lowering the bar. And then the expectations for an educational context are learning. You should learn something more from AI. You can even make that explicit, I think often helps with students. You say at the end of each class, tell me what you learn, how you learn more by using AI for this assignment rather than learning less. Those kind of directions I think would help.
Yeah, and even the research experiment you were talking about, we're putting it in the learning part, helps accelerate the learning more piece. All right, so Glenn, I'm going to go to you. We'll do one more round of individual questions. I think they're a little bit easier. Also, full disclosure, since we're talking full disclosure, there is no AI use in the answering of these questions, but there was some AI use in the drafting of the questions. So just to be clear, everybody. So, Glenn, you've worked extensively on collaborative and creative learning experiences. How should the learning designers rethink AI so that it strengthens collaboration, reflection, and productive struggle rather than just focusing on speed and efficiency?
Yeah, I think I'd reframe this question a little bit, like
Do it.
in the sense of I think one of the big opportunities with AI is using it in ways that help students connect with what they're interested in and like what they're passionate about. One student that I work with, a high school student in Hawaii, Mia, I love the way that she uses AI to look at her course materials and ask like kind of inquire like what can I learn from this course? Like what are the things that like what's kind of the point of this, these different assignments? Here are the things that I'm interested in and how do they kind of connect? How can I connect like what I'm interested in with what I'm being taught in these specific courses? So I think the more that we can kind of help students see themselves in the coursework and get them to the point where they're wanting to engage and tapping into their intrinsic motivation. I think things like collaboration and reflection and struggle are things that they want to engage in. Like they're things that like when you want to learn about something and you can connect it to like your own interests and your own goals. I think that's the part that is the big opportunity. Like how can we use AI as a tool for kind of tapping into people's curiosity and extending people's curiosity so they want to engage in these different ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah. John, I'm going to go to you. We all know this is as bad as AI is ever going to get. It's going to continue to become more
Hopefully it works.
capable. And so some traditional, we talked a little bit about this, as we were prepping, some traditional indicators of learning are going to become unreliable. What kinds of evidence or assessment approaches are most trustworthy in showing real authentic learning is still happening for students?
Well, I think the idea of grading a process rather than the final result is a really important direction that we're going to go here. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes or assumptions that doesn't help is to assume that we're going to give the same assignment for the same reason in the same way for the next decade. That if people have different ways of responding to an assignment, then we need to redesign the assignment so to take that into consideration. And to take the example of English papers, nobody teaching English assigns essays because they need more essays to read. That is just can't be is not the purpose at all. The purpose is to get a student to go through a process that you believe they need to do in order to produce that final product. So if the goal of the assignment is the process, not the product, and we now have visibility into the process if somebody's doing it in a digital way, then make that artifact you turn in something that reflects the process. And then you have some transparency as to where did the person do the thinking? How did they use AI? Were they creative about it? Were they appropriately skeptical? You mentioned, the quality of things we get. I think that's a great thing for learning that models hallucinate, because that keeps users on their toes in a way that's really helpful. It may not be helpful in some other, professional work context, but if we keep that in mind and say you're responsible for what you turn in, but what you turn in is a process, not just a simple product, I think that will help in moving everybody in productive directions.
Yeah, I agree. And I really loved how you talked about looking at different ways to assess. One of the criticisms I hear quite often in the media is that, this generation of students is the first generation not to outscore their parents or grandparents on traditional measures of, achievement, math, PISA tests, etc. And I'm often questioning, like, are we asking the right questions of this generation of students if this, if we're trying to assess their learning? And the analogy is very simple that I use is, I don't know how to milk a cow, but I can drink milk. And my grandfather needed to know how to milk a cow. I could go get a glass of milk right now. But my
Right.
grandfather needed to know how to milk a cow if he wanted milk. And so does that make me smarter or dumber than my grandfather? Absolutely neither one of those things applies. But I no longer have the need to do that skill. My daughter, who is an aerospace engineer, has never had to make a mixtape by sitting on the radio waiting for the right song to come on so that she could hit record. But does that make her dumber than me? Absolutely not. She's an aerospace engineer and I'm not. So, are we really looking at what is the measure of intelligence today? Not that you don't need to understand English and math, but are we really assessing students the right way? And I think your approach is spot on when we talk about assessing the process piece too. Um, Along that line, Dr. Charles, districts often say they value deep thinking and student agency, and I know you do in Denver Public Schools because I've had the opportunity to collaborate with some of your team members before. But what's a concrete system change, policy, procurement, or workflow, any of the above, take your choice, that would actually make those values visible in daily practice when AI is involved?
A couple of years ago, we shifted to a framework for culturally and linguistically sustaining education, right, and curriculum, and making sure that students see themselves in the learning that's taking place within the district and within the curriculum that they're using. And so when we think about leveraging AI, it's broken down into pedagogical practices that can support student agency and project-based learning types of approaches. So experiential, real-world project-based learning, constructing knowledge through critical thinking, um, encouraging sociocultural and socio-emotional growth, which is more and more important as we move forward, leveraging um, inclusive UDL and expanding access with asset-based approaches. And that's really the how we go about teaching the content. And then the actual what we teach also looks different. We're looking at interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary holistic approaches. Transdisciplinary really um, resulting in a product that is either a policy or something that's having an impact on the environment around you, right? So, um, but to John's point, also making sure that it's the process that you're measuring, and so that there are end products at each one of the phases of the process as a whole, and so you're monitoring those sub products that are resulting from the students. Personalized and multimodal, really important. I've talked a bit about understanding yourself as a learner. Students need to understand who they are as learners, because then they can really find out what tendencies they have in terms of learning new information quickly and how do they apply it. Collectivist exploration for future change agents. What's even more important now, AI ethics, clear expectations, and empathy. I mentioned in our pre-discussion that in the news story yesterday, I believe Anthropic is under a lot of heat right now by the Defense Department to remove guardrails for an application that they submitted to the military. And there's some concern by the CEO of Anthropic that that could be misused in some grand ways. And so the guardrail piece continues to be juxtaposed with the ethical requirements that AI demands. And so I know that we're just at the early stages here, but really important for us to do that. So curriculum design, what we teach, how we teach it, and making sure that the work reflects um, the cultural background of the students that are engaging in that work. So I think AI gives you that flexibility.
Awesome. All right, so I heard John talk about it. I heard Richard talk about it. PBL. I don't really have necessarily a question, but and John, I know in our pre-con you were talking about an independent school that you were working with. How do we see a movement back to more project-based learning, problem-based learning in an AI world? How do y'all feel about this?
Maybe one thing to point out. I think part of the reason that assignments have traditionally been relatively simple. That is, the thing turned in is much simpler than the process. It has to do with the demand on teachers to grade things. And so I just wanted to note that if someone turns in a lot of stuff, a teacher can use AI to process that more efficiently, or at least that's a potential direction. So I think we can do project-based learning with more complicated, deliverables using AI on the teaching and assessment side. You referred to assessment before. I mean, my dream would be people get credit for stuff they do that's meaningful, that's not contrived in order to be an assignment, and maybe there's a instrumentation of group collaboration and AI based processing of the data associated with students sending messages back and forth that would help you see who's a good collaborator in this and how did the project come about and so on. I think there are lots of options for going in the direction. It is a really, I mean, I spent a fair amount of time trying to generate, get teachers to do things differently on campus here. It's very, very difficult. There are lots of reasons why people want to keep doing the same thing they've done. So moving to project-based learning for someone who's committed to the process, they have to see the light somehow. But I think if there are pilots and innovators who lead the way, that will help us go in a positive direction.
Can I just also add one other thing to what John just mentioned? The world is full of challenges and problems, right? And you can do a Google search on the top problems, engineering problems for based on any particular organization, World Economic Forum, and so on and so forth. One of the resources that I personally use and I recommend to teachers is Kaggle. And John, you probably have used Kaggle. You're quite familiar with it, right? It's where companies have a real world problem that needs to be solved, and they turn it into a competition. And anyone gets to hop in, submit their solution to that particular problem. But the work that's involved in order to get there is pretty significant and process heavy, and fosters collaboration like no other application that I've seen. So I think that kind of model is really conducive to students collaborating on a deeper level on any problem that they have to solve.
Well, I will say one of my mottos as a teacher was if I'm the one working the hardest in this classroom, I'm doing something wrong. And so I think that gets to the heart of the issue right there. So I often had kids begging, can you just make a test? And I was like, no, because that's more work for me. So let's figure out a way that I'm not having to do the work in this classroom. So we do have a question from a panelist or from an attendee. I'm so excited. Thank you for putting in your question. I'm going to lead it off with Richard, but anybody else is welcome to contribute. But does integrating AI in student assignments risk widening the educational inequalities due to unequal access to paid AI tools? How do you feel about that?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both, right? It depends on how it's being used. I also give an example I've given examples in the past where students who are introduced to large language models and are unfamiliar with the bias that's associated with it can walk away with erroneous information, right? And so this hallucination piece is really important, but also the training that goes into any of the models that are being utilized by students is critically important. So making sure that um, many of these models are now being benchmarked on a variety of criteria. Some of them are, I think there's one called the last human examination or something like that is one of the tests that they now give these large language models. It tests its ability to do really high level mathematics and a host of other things. So I think if you are careful in the choice of the model and you are confident with the model and with the exercise and clearly identified outcomes that you have established for the lesson, I think the more constrained you are at the beginning, it makes it a little bit, it makes it much more manageable in terms of whether or not it is adding value to the lesson that you're talking about or taking away. I gave a talk at one of the local universities here recently. There used to be something called the pedagogy wheel. I don't know if you all are familiar with it. Um, and I went back and looked, and thankfully someone has decided to upgrade it. It's called the pedagogy wheel um, for AI. It's version 7.0. And what it does is it combines several concepts together. It takes the technology adoption model, the SAMR model, where it's substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition, and it couples that with Bloom's taxonomy. And then they give you a host of particular applications that you can use. Some of them are AI applications, but then towards the center of this model and this framework, you have all of the different types of activities you can have students do that would be meaningful, enriching, and things of that nature. And so I think it's important that you balance all of those things. And I know too that there are standards that we're obligated to comply with. I just worry about the standards, the state standards on any given state right now, the the rate at which standards change is not going to meet the needs of teachers and students as AI continues to double in power every 6 months, roughly, right? So that balance is really important.
Yeah, I wrote a blog post middle of last year that actually tracked um, what a state says a teacher needs in their pre-service program to be certified as an educator. What that and I just did it in Texas. I could do it in any state. I just picked
Yeah.
one. What that teacher is required to teach, what that school is required to teach, so the student gets a high school diploma, and track that to how it matches up with what the Future Jobs Report, World Economic Forum says a student needs to be successful, and the chasm is so big and you can't change those things. You they just It's like turning the Titanic around trying to get your state standards to change. So excellent. Does
So
anybody else go ahead?
if you have any way of influencing that, Stacy, in the role that you currently have, it would be terribly valuable because the chasm is growing and we've got to do something different, right? So what is it that we need to do? Um, and then we'll talk later, but I wanted to hear the other panelists as well.
Yeah, so Glenn and John, do you have anything to add to our chat from our question about AI widening educational inequalities?
I mean, I think this is always a concern and a consideration when something new is available. I think one kind of glimmer or hope, or one thing that I see kind of on the horizon, is that in the US, primarily, we see AI as controlled by and delivered by a few very large companies. And so there's their pricing scheme and their profit motive. The other thing that's happening in the world is in China, there's a huge amount of work to produce smaller, free, open source models that are available to everybody. It's extremely useful to the research community, so we in universities are very plugged into that. But I think it's an indication that in the longer run, there may be some high-priced products that aren't going to be easy to make available to everyone in all areas of the country and the world. But there are also trailing, last year's product 2 years ago that's getting better as the frontier gets better, and a whole host of things that are less expensive to use that will open up the possibility of making this really a technology that can be used by many.
I think access to the most advanced tools is definitely an issue, but as a kind of a provocation in the opposite direction, I'd probably bet on a kid who had good habits around how they use AI, using like a worse model versus like a student who has access to like a greater model, but with less skill in terms of their mental habits. So I think in some ways, more in a weird way, like more advanced tools could introduce a risk of becoming kind of lazier in some ways. like where you're not doing as much work. So the analogy I use is I have a friend, Go Nakamura, who's a really great guitarist, and he has this habit of like picking up like toy guitars and just like jamming on them and doing these crazy things where you think like, wow, that's like a $40 guitar, and he's making it sound amazing. And when you develop that kind of skill, I think those are the kind of durable skills that are, regardless of the technology that you're using, can be really useful.
Awesome. All right, we're running out of time. I had one lightning round question for you. I was going to give you 30 seconds to answer, but I'm going to give you a choice. You can have my lightning, you have 30 seconds. You can either answer my lightning round question or you can help with our panelists or with our attendee, Didar, who has a question about what school teachers can help parents do to support their children's use of AI. So you have that option in front of you, or if you could change one thing, policy, workflow, interface, habit, whatever, one thing to better support deep learning, what would it be? Anybody can go first.
I'll take the parent thing.
Do it.
What I would suggest is, as a parent, ask your uh, student or child, how are you using AI, and walk me through it so I know what you know. I think just sitting down and asking questions and then trying to do one or two things together, would be eye-opening for all parties. So that's a kind of a quick, off the top of my head suggestion.
Great answer.
I would build on John's and say parent academies, right? So having students share in a public setting how they're using AI, how the teacher is teaching them how to use AI, and how parents can use AI would be terribly useful for our parents to get engaged because, like most new technologies, it's a challenge for adoption over a certain age.
Then what do you want to add?
I'll also add to that, which is in some ways, parents can support their children's use of AI by engaging in project-based learning at home. And so like
Mhm.
take something that the family does together, say it's like planning a family vacation or like doing like something around the house or whatever it is, and use AI together to do a project and then kind of reflect on like what is it like and like what are the things that you're noticing. And that way it's kind of situated in a real thing. And then you can and it's something that has a sort of common concern. Well, I don't know how much kids and parents' interests align in this way, but just try to make it real and try to make it kind of fun and interesting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our panelists, Glenn, John, and Richard, for making systems visible, and to our audience for thinking beyond tools and toward design, and for great questions. Didar, you can be the moderator next time. You had some good questions. They picked you over me. But the takeaway is clear. AI doesn't determine the quality of learning. The systems we design around it do. So let's design better systems. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It has been inspiring. Thank you for attending, and CoSN really appreciates your support. Check us out at www.cosin.org to check out future webinars, interact with us, join CoSN if you're not already a member, and don't forget we have our amazing annual conference coming up in April in Chicago, so CoSN 2026. Hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.